Let's go over how to fill in a VPAT and create an ACR or Accessibility Conformance Report. On the screen with me is the WCAG edition of the VPAT. Just keep in mind that there are other editions based on different technical standards, but we're going to continue on with the WCAG edition. Now, as I'm scrolling down the screen, we see that there are several pages, 10 pages in fact, of various information and instructions. Think of this as background information to help you fill out the VPAT. But when we actually create the ACR and we issue the ACR, we're not going to keep any of these pages in the ACR. So this will be outside of the report. We will remove these pages. And so we will simply focus in on what is now page 11 of this document, which is the Accessibility Conformance Report portion of the document. So I think sometimes people think that VPATs and ACRs are more confusing than they are. They're actually really straightforward. And I think part of the reason that it may seem more complicated than it is because you have all of those initial pages. But just know that they are there to help support you as you are working through the VPAT and creating the ACR. So we're going to cover a lot of that information now that we are at the ACR. And before I get into the actual details, let's set this up with an analogy. An ACR is like a movie. And so we have the details and then the actual movie. Now the movie is the main feature, right? That's what everything is really about. But there are a lot of surrounding details that are also important. So in terms of a movie, we need to know what the movie is, what theater it's playing at, what time it's playing at, and other details are also relevant. And that's really what the ACR gets at. Is there are two different parts of the ACR. One part is the details, and these are very easy to fill out, but they are also very important because they provide us the additional information we need around the actual accessibility portion, the material portion of the ACR. So now let's continue on with these details. We start off with the company name in brackets, and we're going to fill that in with whatever the company who owns the product or service is. And then we will move on down to these different prompts, starting with the name of the product slash version if it's available. And then we will have the report date, so what date the report is issued. We will have a description of the product. We will have the contact information for the person who is really the go-to person for this product. If anybody has any questions, there is also an area for notes. If any additional notes are to be added to the ACR, you don't have to fill this in, but there may be some notes to add. And then there is also a prompt for evaluation methods used. You want to include here all of the different ways that the digital asset has been evaluated. And so this is really important, and this is going to be one of the ways if your ACR is scrutinized, this will be one of the ways it's scrutinized because the buyer, the procurement agent, whoever it is, they're going to look and see how exactly your product or service was evaluated for accessibility. And if this is very short or this just doesn't have the methodologies that they'd want to see, then that's going to reflect poorly upon your ACR. And then we have the applicable standards and guidelines. Now, obviously, we're using the WCAG edition here. And then you would specify what version and conformance level that the ACR covers. So then continuing on, we have terms. And there is nothing to be filled out with the term section, but the term section is very important because that leads us to the table. And when we are looking at the second column, we have conformance level. In the first column, we have criteria. So here with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, here are all of the success criteria that we are familiar with. And so for each row, we're going to account for that criterion, and then we're going to add the conformance level. And so going back to the terms, we know what we would put for the conformance level. We would either have supports, partially supports, does not support, not applicable, or not evaluated. And for not evaluated, this is only going to be used for in the circumstance where we're working with AAA success criteria. So that's the only exception here. Otherwise, you have to have one of the four other terms: supports, partially supports, does not support, or not applicable. And with not applicable, here the criterion would just not be relevant to the product, and otherwise everything is self-explanatory. So that's what you'll put in the conformance level column. When it comes to remarks and explanations, the only time you're required to add a remark or explanation is where the product or service does not support or partially supports the criteria. Otherwise, it's at your option, but I will tell you that usually you want to have at least a few remarks and explanations, because even if your product is fully conformant with the standard, you're going to you're going to bring your ACR into question if you just have an empty column for the remarks and explanations. So even if it's fully conformant, you do want to show that attention to detail has been paid, and that your product or service really has been thoroughly evaluated. And so here you can just add some additional remarks and explanations that speak to the accessibility, maybe what went into evaluating the accessibility, etc. But it's always nice to show this, because you don't just want to have a conformance level that says supports and then a remarks and explanation column that is blank. So again, with the remarks and explanations, it's just good to add in a few extra comments. So we can see here that there are different tables for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The first table is for Level A conformance. And so with Level A conformance, think of this as the absolute essentials for accessibility. And then for the second table, Level double A conformance, this is really providing a more comprehensive level of accessibility. So you definitely want to have these two tables filled out if you are going for double A conformance with a given version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And then there's a third table with triple A success criteria. And remember that you can actually add in here this last term, not evaluated, for triple A success criteria. And then we have WCAG 2.x report. Here you would just put in the version that you're using. And so that's how you fill in the VPAT and create an accessibility conformance report. But you do have to have an audit conducted for your digital assets so that you're able to intelligently put in this information about the conformance level and then add any additional information in the remarks and explanations column. So an audit is going to be necessary. Otherwise, you're not going to have this information. So at the very least, if you were to put together an ACR, you'd want to have some type of assessment. But it's highly recommended that you conduct an audit. That way, it's a thorough evaluation that really gets into the most important and most applicable aspects of the product or service. And you want to have a comprehensive evaluation that's going to thoroughly evaluate everything. And then you will take that audit and then use the audit information to populate these tables. Now, this is not the VPAT document when filled in, even when you have an ACR, it's not an audit. It's really like the audit results carried over to the standardized document, to where, yes, you don't have all of the information that's contained in the document, but what you do have are the really important takeaways. The final results. It's like you don't get the entire box score. Like let's say we have a basketball game. You're not going to get the entire box score, but you will get the final point totals for each player. So it's a little bit like that. That's a nice loose analogy. And then remarks and explanations is just where you add additional information that helps give more context to what's going on. And again, the only time this is absolutely required is when you have a partially supports or a does not support. So if you need help with filling in a VPAT, and really the material aspect of this is the audit, accessible.org can help you with that. And we can provide the audit based on whatever version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines you would like to use, or potentially we can work with another technical standard. It's usually the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We can provide you with the audit, or we can also actually fill in the VPAT for you and issue the ACR to your organization so that you have this. It's independently issued. I can tell you that this comes up in the marketplace quite often, is that when buyers or procurement agents are scrutinizing your ACR, they will also ask you whether it was created in-house or whether a third-party company issued the ACR, and they may even ask who was the issuer. So because ACRs are relied upon, and especially now because compliance considerations are a part of the buying process, more so than ever. It's not that they weren't before, but now, ACRs are being relied upon for compliance. So most buyers are looking well beyond just whether or not you have this document. They're looking to see the integrity of the document. They're looking to see how accurate do we think this document is. And there is a lot of there is a lot of scrutiny that is going into ACR. So if you need help with an audit and or filling in a VPAT and creating an ACR, accessible.org can help you with this. This is my company, and we will be happy to help you. I will include more information in the description. But for now, and by the way, you can definitely create your own ACR. But again, that just comes back to what I was just talking about. Even if you created your own ACR, it's like, do you have the requisite knowledge and expertise in accessibility to accurately fill in this document? And again, buyers are going to scrutinize. If it did come in-house, then there's the tendency for bias and to overlook certain things or bypass certain things because they may be in future editions. And so buyers really want to make sure that they are getting an unbiased and accurate reflection of your product or services accessibility. So accessible.org can help you with your VPAT and getting an ACR. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I will include more information in the description.